Welcome everybody to this webinar, How to Create and Manage a Successful Property Budget for Your Voluntary Organisation. My name is Antonia Swinson, I'm Chief Executive of the Ethical Property Foundation, and we are the UK's property advice charity supporting the voluntary sector. We hope you'll enjoy this webinar and find it really useful for the future. May I introduce our trainers today, Roger Annis and Virginia Masters. Roger.
Hello everybody, I'm Roger Annis. I've been with Ethical Property Foundation for about 5 years, helping our charity clients with a wide variety of property related problems and issues, including leasing, owning property, buying and selling, and as is most relevant today, managing their property budgets.
And Virginia.
Hello, my name is Virginia Masters. I've been working alongside Ethical Property Foundation as an associate for many years, and I specialise in the charity sector, both in procuring suppliers, as you're going to find out later, and also researching property and relocation and space planning. So we cover between us, Roger and I, most of the stuff that really hits your budget. So we hope we're both going to be very useful with our information for you today.
Thank you very much. So a few words about our service. Next slide. So the Ethical Property Foundation was set up in 2004, and we offer free advice and training, online resources, as well as affordable property strategies, feasibility studies, etc. And we work with an in-house team, of which Roger and Virginia are two, and also our registered solicitors, specialist surveyors, and even a charity VAT specialist. So we hope you'll visit our website and will enjoy this webinar. Thank you very much.
Hello everybody. Just a very quick overview of what we hope to cover by today's session. We start with why do you need a property, and I suppose the thinking behind this from our perspective is that if you don't know how much that your property is going to cost you, then how do you know you can afford it? So we hope that by the end of today's session you'll have a good idea of the sort of framework you need for creating your budget. We'll also cover understanding what you need from property. Is your property currently suited for your needs, or is it something different that you really require? And can you change the way you operate from your property to make it more efficient and therefore make your budgeting easier? On the plus side, because budgeting doesn't always have to be bad news, we'll look at some opportunities for generating income to offset the costs of operating and running from your property. And we'll cover a little bit about insurance. There's a very important point here, which we'll deal with later on regarding insuring your building or your property. And lastly, in the section that I'm going to be covering, we'll look a little bit about taking professional advice. Not everybody will need professional advice. You don't always need it, but it's important to understand that if you are going to engage external professionals to advise you on aspects of your property, you know how to go about it, how to get the best deal, and how to budget for those costs that you might incur. Virginia will then take over, and she'll look at how knowing your building, whether you do need to purchase a property. She'll look at sourcing and managing suppliers, and she'll also cover green policy. So that's really a very quick overview of what we're going to cover today. And looking then to start with this on the next slide, please. So looking at this next slide, do you need a property budget? May sound like a glib question, but we believe the answer is most certainly you do. We'll start off by stating the obvious. All properties need maintenance. Building problems don't go away. In fact, they have a nasty habit of getting worse if they're ignored. Take a simple example, say a leaking gutter, damaged gutter can cause some damp penetration into the building. Before you know it, the damp has got worse, the plaster's beginning to come away from the walls, the damp has spread, you've got rot, and you've got potential structural problems. So all of this can end up being very expensive, and what could have been a simple matter of repairing the gutter in the first place, for which you have a budget of a few pounds, could end up costing you a great deal more money because you haven't budgeted for it. The problem has been ignored, and has become much worse, and therefore cost a great deal more money. So clearly you need a plan of scheduled maintenance, and flowing from that, you need a budget of how much that maintenance is going to cost. We suggest that you look at this on ideally a 3-year basis. In other words, the current year and the next 2 years. Look at what your property is going to cost you. Schedule out those costs item by item. Ideally in a spreadsheet, but it doesn't have to be. Just do what's comfortable for yourselves. But by scheduling them out item by item, line by line, it's clear what you're talking about, what's included, what's potentially not been included. And if you need to go back and revise it later on, then you can easily identify the items and those areas that you want to revise. We'd suggest you start with the simple things, the basic day-to-day running costs, the heating, the lighting, insurance, the regular costs that can be easily identified. Obviously, energy here is a very topical issue at present, and you'll need to make sure that your budget covers not just your current energy costs, but any increases, as we all know, that are likely to come through in the near future. Once you've set that out as a schedule of your known day-to-day running costs, as it were, have a look then at what the potential maintenance liabilities of your building might be over the next 2 to 3 years. And you can start scheduling these in. They don't all have to be done at once, unless unless they're very pressing. So you can spread your costs by spreading your budget for maintenance works over the next 2 to 3 years. Look at things like the plant and machinery, if you have anything in the building, the lifts, if you have one, any air conditioning, boilers and so forth. Make sure you put in not just the running costs, not just the servicing costs, but any potential repairs or replacements costs in the future. And if funds permit, and I appreciate that that's not always going to be the case with many organisations, but if funds do permit and your building is extensive, complicated, very large, you might consider taking some professional advice from a qualified building surveyor in terms of perhaps preparing a planned preventative maintenance schedule. That's a schedule of just the sorts of things we've been talking about, works which you might do this year, next year, the year after, and so forth. So you address potential issues with maintenance and repair before they arise. That way you can take the information from that planned preventative maintenance schedule, turn it into a budget, and drop those figures into your property budget. That way you have a clear idea, as far as possible, what your property is going to cost you to run, not just this year, but in the forthcoming years. Where you can't take professional advice, or where you haven't got exact numbers, use estimates. You may be able to find information out from local builders, for example. You may have an idea from works you've done previously, but putting in an estimate is not a problem. It identifies that there is a potential cost there, and once your estimate is in the budget, you can, of course, as we said before, revise it later on. If you are going to take professional advice from an external independent professional advisor, make sure you've got their fees in there, VAT if that's applicable to you, and don't forget to add in a contingency. That's a buffer just in case things cost more than you're anticipating. As I said, we talk a little bit later on about generating income. This can also go into your budget. So if there are opportunities within your property to generate income by letting space out and so forth, which we'll cover a little bit later, that could go in as a positive on your budgets to help to defray the costs of your building maintenance. Incidentally, I should mention at this stage, this is a little bit of an advertisement for Ethical Property Foundation, but in the pack of information that we'll be sending to you as part of this session, there is a property plan. This is a much larger subject than we have time to cover today, but it's worth having a look at this on our website within your pack, and generally have a look at our website, because there's a lot of information there relating to budgeting and to property maintenance and so forth. And the property plan in particular, as I say, it's a much wider topic, but it does include an element of budgeting in it, which you might find useful. So going back to the budget, I've explained in some detail now why you need one. Looking at the bullet points on the slide, obviously it helps you with OSCR regulations, that you're meeting your requirements under those regulations by having a plan, and therefore knowing how much your property is going to cost you, and therefore how much your your overall budget for running your organization is. And it might also help you with securing and managing your funding, because if you can show to potential funders that you have a clear idea and a plan for what your property is going to be costing you over the next 2 to 3 years, that gives them greater confidence that you're a well-run, well-budgeted organization, and one that they're more prepared perhaps to forward funds to. So now let's look on the next slide. In terms of what do you need from your property. I've touched on this briefly already, but we often find with charity clients that they're in properties which they've been in for some time, and there's a bit of a status quo, if you like, that they use the property the way that they do because they always have done so, and no one has really taken the time to stop and think, well, can we do things differently perhaps? Is there a different way in which we can operate from this property? Do we need all of this property? Are there better ways of operating? Can we, for example, share space and generate some income by leasing to like-minded organizations? Is there potential for generating income when we're not using the property? For example, evenings or weekends. Are there local groups, classes, schools, all sorts of things that, all sorts of potential occupiers who could share the use of your space and therefore share the costs with you. You can generate some income from allowing these organizations to use your space, and as I said before, that can be used to defray the costs of running and maintaining your building. But a word of warning here: you do need to check to make sure you are permitted to allow others to use your space, even if you own the property yourselves. Sometimes with charity properties, if they've been bequeathed to you, perhaps some years ago, there might be some restrictions within the title deeds, or there may be some sort of restriction restricting the use of the property to just your organization, to just your organization's use or aims and objectives. So do check that out before you commit yourself to allowing allowing others to use it. You can do this yourself, or perhaps best to ask your solicitor to review your title documents to ensure that you're not going to end up in breach of any restrictions inadvertently. So that's, I think, all we need to say on that slide. Let's look at the next one. Next slide, please. Thank you. As I said, in terms of potential for generating income from your property, to defray your costs. This could be short or long term, as we say here. You might have a regular weekly or daily or whatever meeting that takes place that from another organization runs, for which they pay you a license fee, a rent, or whatever you want to call it. Maybe you can share your property with somebody else. You only use part, so therefore the other part can be leased out separately. Whatever you do and however you decide to do it, do take legal advice here. This is important. We appreciate that the legal advice will cost you some money, but it's very important to make sure you're not ending up in a situation where you're tied to an arrangement that you don't really want in later months or years, or you've fallen foul of some regulations within your own title. So do take legal advice and make sure that what you're intending to do is acceptable, is actually on the terms that you want it to be on, and is not going to cause you a headache later on for a short-term gain now. Make sure that everything you've agreed with whoever might share your space with you is properly documented. Initially, we call it heads of terms. That's a sort of informal document setting out what has been agreed between the parties. And then if it warrants a legal document, which it probably will in most cases, then make sure that that heads of terms document is sent to your solicitor. They prepare a simple legal document to cover the arrangement, and that legal document does actually reflect what you've agreed with whoever's going to share your space. It should be straightforward. I hope it doesn't sound more onerous and costly than it should be. But it's important to get these things right. It's important to have them properly documented to make sure you don't end up later regretting something that you've committed yourself to doing now. Let me have a look on the next slide, if we could, please. I mentioned insurance previously, and this is a very important point. Many of you will be in properties that you've owned and occupied for years, you're almost certainly responsible for insuring that property. Insurance is based on a reinstatement value, which is a professional estimate of how much it would cost to rebuild or replace the property if it was damaged or destroyed by fire, earthquake, explosion, and so forth, the normal insured risks. Building costs have increased fairly significantly in the last 3 or 4 years. And if your insurance reinstatement valuation on which your insurance cover is based, if it's more than 2 or 3 years old, 3 or 4 years old perhaps, it's quite likely to be out of date, and the insurance cover is therefore quite likely to be inadequate. This is, as I said, this is an important point. You should check this to make sure that your reinstatement value reinstatement valuation is current and properly reflects the true cost of rebuilding or replacing your property. Because if it doesn't, and if the worst happens and your property is, for example, is burnt down in a fire, then you could find that the insurance company only pays out the value in the reinstatement valuation, which is not enough to rebuild it. And this can cause you as your organization and potentially your trustees personally some very serious problems, because if you need to replace the property, as you're almost certainly going to do, you're going to have to find that shortfall yourselves, potentially from your own pockets. So, as I say, this is an important point. Do check this. If your insurance reinstatement valuation is any more than a few years old, have it redone professionally by a properly qualified surveyor. And again, going back to our topic of budgets, make sure that your budget covers the cost of a regular reinstatement valuation, ideally every no more than 3 years. Potentially more often if you're in an environment where building costs are increasing steeply. But as I say, an important point to make sure that you do cover. I've probably laboured that a little bit too much, but there we are. If we could move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. Lastly, in terms of the section that I'm going to talk about, taking professional advice. I've mentioned this a few times already. You won't always need to take professional advice, but it's important to know when you might need to, and to know how to go about this. That professional advice could be from solicitors or lawyers, could be from an agent advising you on valuation or so forth, or more likely in terms of building repairs and maintenance, it could be from a building surveyor who's helping you with building repairs, assessing the cost of those repairs, assessing what might be needed in your planned preventative maintenance schedule, and so forth. Do make sure, first of all, you've got the right person or organization for the job. So I'd suggest ask around a bit, maybe speak to your neighbors, maybe speak to other organizations you know who've had building works or had some valuation work or legal work done in the past. See what their experience has been, see how they got on, see whether they recommend whoever they've used to you. This may sound obvious, but we do come across fairly often situations where people have inadvertently taken the wrong advice, or they've taken advice from the wrong sorts of organizations, and they've ended up with more problems than they had originally. Once you've found the organization or the professional that you want to use, talk to them about fees and make sure that you've agreed fees with them up front in writing before you engage and before you start your project. Make sure you understand exactly what's included and what's not included, because often, particularly with lawyers, they can this nasty little thing called disbursements, where these are sort of additional costs which are for all sorts of bits and pieces, different aspects of the work that they do, which can be unquantified, but can come as a bit of a shock at the end of the project when the bill is received. So make sure you're understanding entirely everything that's involved. To say, have it confirmed in writing, and don't fall into the trap of having an open-ended agreement. Do negotiate fees. We often say to our charity clients, there's no such thing as a standard fee, and agents in particular will often try and persuade you that there is a standard fee that they always charge for this type of work. Inquire, make sure that you understand what it is that's covered, and challenge them. Look at negotiating a reduction, see what you can achieve. You might be surprised by what you can reduce their initially quoted fee to. And again, clearly it goes without saying, once those fees have been agreed, make sure they go into your budget, not just for the work you're currently doing, but for the works you might be anticipating doing over the next 2 to 3 years, so that the budget is as complete as you can possibly get it. That's all I think I wanted to say. Thank you. In terms of my slides, I'll now hand you over to Virginia, who will take you through the remainder of the presentation.
Next slide, please. Thank you, Roger. I'm going down the sort of nitty-gritty area, so some things may be repeated, but if they are being repeated, it's because they're really necessary that you absorb them. So we're going to start with knowing your building, which really basically is identifying all the elements of the building and the current condition and any subsequent actions that might be necessary to repair, to replace, or clean, even lubricate each element of your building, and identify again when each element should be regularly checked again. I always advise appointing the official checker to check these elements regularly, to be responsible, and although it might seem over the top, a checker of the checker to make sure it is being done. Put your reports in writing. You don't have to be a Luddite, you don't have to write in pen and paper, get them on the computer, get them recorded, so you can see at any point exactly what you've spotted, whether it's something that needs work right away or something that may need work in the future, but it's on record. When you have, and I hope you do have, regular management, trustees, committee meetings, make sure everybody knows the state of the building and what might be coming up, because the more people that are aware, the more chance you have to properly have it located in your budget, the costs that might be involved. I also suggest that you regularly compare charges for the utilities you're being provided with. Unfortunately, sometimes people get complacent if they have a contract with you, and you've got to be sure that you're getting comparable costs. So check regularly the market prices for things. If you find that the market actually is cost would give you a better deal, then go back to your existing utility supplier, say, look, I can negotiate this, or can you meet this? And if they don't want to, then, you know, budget is everything, so switch. If you're getting the same deal and it's costing you less, it's helpful to your budget. These are basic everyday things that you really should know and do. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. Do you really need to make a purchase? It might seem, of course we do, but maybe you don't. Can the need be met any other way? Have you researched thoroughly that the purchase is actually essential? Have you considered alternatives? And more importantly, is there sufficient budget for the purchase, including all related costs? And if you have a particular time frame for the purchase to be completed, these are sort of the things you should do before you commit. I have some top tips, which I will underline heavily. Do not make major decisions in a rush. And if you need professional advice, as Roger has quite rightly said, it'd be wise to invest in this, as it will save you money and time in the long run, and possibly expensive mistakes. Always ask and get follow-up on references. Now, when I don't mean just look at the reviews that a supplier or contractor might have on their website. You want references that you are able to contact and speak to, somebody who's used this service and will personally back it. This is essential. Always get 3 quotes for everything. I will keep saying this through this webinar. I'm sorry if I'm emphasizing it, but I can't say this more enough. Make sure the purchase will give you not just short-term, but long-term benefits. And do remember, it's not always the lowest quote that's the best. As Roger said, always allow a contingency amount in case of unexpected costs. It's, you know, You can never be absolutely sure that you've counted for everything. And if at the end you don't spend your contingency, well done, have a party. If it's there, it's essential. And I've said in the previous slide, don't allow long-term suppliers to become complacent. Check standards are maintained and that costs remain competitive. Now, the other part about suppliers is procurement. Getting the best deals is one thing, but establishing a long-term coherent procurement strategy that will support growth is quite another. This is core business activity, which requires time and investment. Think in terms of smart spending instead of cost cutting, and involve everyone in your organization. Use your staff team networks and knowledge. Ideas can come from unlikely sources. You never know that somebody who just is a volunteer actually has a relative who runs a brilliant building company. You don't know. So spread the search. And if you establish a good long-term relationship, it can offer great value. On the other hand, markets do move on, and quote, mates rates could actually be costing you money. So key questions when making purchasing decisions. Do we need this product or service? Can the need be met any other way? Is a suitable product available anywhere else in the organization? Can the requirement be met by renting or sharing rather than purchasing? Is the quantity requested essential? Is the specification currently used fit for purchase? Because Roger touched on this. Sometimes what you thought your building should provide a few years ago has changed. Assess the current need. And can the product serve a useful purpose after its initial use? So people working in charities and social enterprises now see procurement as a useful way to make a difference, and with a definite effect on your organization's bottom line. If your organization is a member of the Social Enterprise Scotland or local CVS, you may find that you can check out, they might have group membership purchasing discounts and the main areas which you need to budget for. So property costs, energy and utilities, business rates, services, gas, electric, water, insurance, materials. All these things are in your budget. And if there's any chance of getting block purchasing agreements, then obviously it will help your budget. So the top tips, they're in the pack. Remember them. Next slide, please. Okay. This is to assess suppliers and contractors for their competence and value. Always take up references. Here I go again, but always take up references. As a charity, you are required to show you've made the best decision based on proper research when employing a contractor or supplier. It's best business practice to get 3 quotes for everything. Now, if one quote is considerably lower than the other 2, beware. Unfortunately, many contractors and suppliers quote low to get the job, and once secured, extra costs start creeping in. So if 2 of the quotes are similar, then select the firm with whom you feel most comfortable. If building works would be undertaken, even minor building works, select a staff member or a trustee to regularly supervise. Weekly meetings, checks on progress, I really would advise. Agree a completion date, and within the contract include a penalty clause if this date is not met. Sometimes this unexpected can happen, so make sure you have a contingency amount reserved to cover this eventuality built into your budget. Now, you may be surprised and think it's wrong, but it is normal for contractors to request a 40% payment on commencement of work to cover the cost of materials and initial labour supply. In some cases, a pre-agreement can be made to make part payments when certain stages of the work have been reached and are to your satisfaction. But now this is underlined in red, people. Do not pay the full amount prior to satisfactory completion of the job. Never. In fact, if you can pre-agree a certain amount of months before you sign it off, and pay the final amounts, all the better. In the best conducted circles, sometimes something that you thought was perfect on day one, when you accept the end of the job, suddenly gets problems, and you need to be able to go back and say, fix this before we finally pay you off. Okay, next slide, please. Most important for budgeting, best value. This is a short and sweet example, just so you keep it in mind. Best value has a definition as the most advantageous combination of cost, quality, expertise, and sustainability to meet the stated requirements. So your aim should be to work towards best value procurement policies. After receiving your 3 quotes, make sure they're all proposing like for like. And as I said earlier, always be suspicious if any quote is significantly lower than the others. Just as a warning case, I was working with a charity in the Hammersmith area of London, and they were buying new office equipment. They were buying specifically new chairs. They said they'd done their search of the market, and they invested in what I could only call a basic chair. It was reasonable to their budget. It was under £100 per chair, and it came with a 1-year guarantee, which frankly for a chair is nothing. They learnt their lesson. 13 months in after this purchase, half the chairs had problems with the casters. Some had fallen off, back supports were not working properly, and frankly, it had been a mistake. We went back to advise them. They spent £80 more per chair, bought from a reputable supplier. It came with a 5-year guarantee, and 7 years further on, they haven't had to buy a new chair. So it's always best to include this quality, sustainability, as we said in best value. Best value is not necessarily the cheapest. In fact, it isn't the cheapest. So big red marks if you go the cheapest route. Don't do it. Can I have the next slide, please? In this whole climate change world we're living in, green policies are important. You may well have a green policy, or you might need updating it, or you want to start one. The major part of green policy is to minimize waste. You can apply it for any sustainability grants that might be available to you to help make you more green and make you more sustainable. And apart from that, there are little things that are more simple, that you can provide, say, a safe store for cycles, and consider providing a shower to encourage cycling. Or if driving to your premises is the only option, maybe organising car shares. Next slide, please. Okay, how can you be greener? So I'm just going to give you a small starter checklist. It might be that I'm teaching my grandmother to suck eggs, but if I don't say it, and I should have said it, I'll regret it. So think twice before printing out paper copies when an email could be sent instead. And if you have to print, select double-sided. Again, saves paper. Take numerous waste paper bins away from under desks and tables. So by ensuring that recycling bins are available inside your premises as well as outside that can recycle paper, bottles, cans and cardboard, not only is that a very good idea, but it makes people get up, walk around and not sit in front of screens. Develop a system for turning off and not just leaving on standby all equipment. Replace light bulbs for energy saving ones, and encourage staff to turn off lights when areas are not in use. And if your garden has outside space, whether you're using it for parking or not, consider whether you could create a garden. All lovely green reasons to get a bit more green responsible. I hope you can apply some of them. Next slide, please. The next slide is all about minimizing costs and maximizing potential, which is what running a good property budget is all about. It's important to regularly assess the costs you're incurring, especially on utilities in this expensive era, electricity, gas, water, etc. Try not to tie yourself into long-term contracts, which will give you no flexibility to take advantage of competitive pitching from alternative suppliers. Try to introduce a culture of cost savings. If a room is not being used, the lighting should be turned off. Don't keep equipment on standby. Minimize printing of documents unless absolutely essential, and investigate any sustainability grants available to you. Assess particularly your use of space, whether you are renting or owning your property. If you have surplus space available in rooms or areas which are rarely used, it's worth considering whether you could sublet them or hire them out to another organisation on an hourly basis, remembering, of course, to be careful to get all the details of it in a legal document. And there, again, as Roger said, use a solicitor. Apart from ethical reasons to make sure your premises are disability accessible, really and truly, this could also be a good income source. If you provide a disability accessible toilet or you ramp the entry, this need not be excessively expensive to do, and it could enable you to encourage disability accessibility to a wide range of new potential users, staff members, volunteers, etc. And it would also enable disabled groups to visit, and maybe they could potentially hire space. So it's worth mentioning that the initial mobility we've been discussing, which is mobility disability, isn't the only one. There's no reason why you shouldn't invest in a hearing loop for your meeting room or braille signage, so you're opening up your building to as many people as possible, and this will improve your chances of making extra income and helping your budget. Also, consider the hours that your premises are open. Would it be possible to increase the hours in order to produce additional income from, say, after school clubs, breakfast clubs, mother and baby groups, or IT training sessions for the less technologically proficient? And I think, as I mentioned before, if you have outside space, maybe parking area, would it be possible to create an allotment to grow and provide fruit and vegetables for your own and staff use, or possibly for sale? It's all budgetary possibilities that should help to maximise your budget. Next slide, please. Okay, just a summing up here, things to remember. Buying and suppliers are not just procurement for major works. Supply selection processes for using best value policy. Again, I'm emphasising it, get 3 quotes for everything. And that means everything, not just building contractors, but also solicitors, surveyors, removers, cleaning contractors. These rules should still apply. And there are basic mistakes to avoid, which I'm going to hammer on to you as a final thought. Not checking references provided by potential suppliers, not checking that all inclusions are in the quoted price, not making sure that all your specified requirements are confirmed in the proposal you received, not getting fewer than those 3 quotes, not allowing for any disruption to the working environment, which sometimes is inevitable, not consulting with and keeping your team and colleagues involved, and most important of all, not paying in full upfront. I hope that this has all given you the necessary knowledge to run your property as budgetary efficient as possible. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Virginia. Well, it's been a great pleasure to have the opportunity to work with you today, and I hope you learned plenty of good information to manage your property budgets. Those of us who sit on premises committees know what a balancing act it is, and we're here to help. So if you have a problem or an issue you want some help with, then we're always here. And do visit our website, propertyhelp.org, and fill in an inquiry form. And do please remember to put CRT Scotland 2023. I'd like to thank Roger and Virginia very much indeed, and also Coalfields Regeneration Trust Scotland, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you very much.